what you can do for them. Because I think sometimes we go into businesses and letting them know, what we need them to do for us. We want leads and we want appointments and here's who we are. And instead what I did is I really spent time getting to know them because I wanted to understand, what is a florist looking for? What kind of client is looking for? What are the photographers looking for? So that I could bridge that gap, and I didn't go away.
This is Small Business Celebration, where we introduce you to successful small business owners at their place of business so that you can learn something that you can use today to grow a strong and profitable business and get your next big breakthrough. Producer Emily, what's with this Post-it note? I know we're going to be talking about juggling your full-time job while you're building your full-time business, and I know we're going to be talking about seeking ways to broaden your business with approaching your legacy clients, but what's with the Post-it?
Well, we should also talk about wedding budgeting, wedding receptions, and diamonds with our next guest.
Well, to guide us through all that is Colleen Bauer, the owner of Fairy Godmother Events. Welcome to Small Business Celebration.
Thank you, Michael.
And for Visioneers who don't know who are you, and what is it that you do?
My name is Colleen Bauer, and I own a company called Fairy Godmother Events, and we do weddings and events.
When you got started with your business, you were already working for somebody else.
I was.
For whom did you work, and what were you doing?
I worked for Rabobank,
Okay.
big ag bank in town from the Netherlands.
Right.
And I was their Treasury Services Division manager. We had 15 Treasury Service managers all over California.
Okay.
And our job was to service the ag client and bring in all their deposits and take care of them on the retail side of the bank. And we worked alongside the relationship managers to make sure that we had the entire relationship with a client and not just their loan.
But your association with the bank changed.
Yes.
What did you start to do with them?
So, backstory, I chaired the Business Women's Conference that just took place this last week.
Bakersfield Women's Business Conference? Right?
Yes, and that was, 16 years ago.
Wow.
And from the conference, I had a couple of the people that were working there, vendors, that said, you should be doing events. Why aren't you doing events? And I thought they were crazy. I had always done events for family and friends, but not as a career or a business. And I started looking at, what do day of coordinators do?
Right.
And spent probably a good 6 to 8 months kind of doing homework and looking at it. I really loved what I was doing at the bank, and I didn't have any vision of leaving, so I thought I would just do it for fun.
You got bitten by the event bug.
I did, yes, it bit me for sure, yes, it did.
Well, why was that? What was so fascinating about being an event coordinator?
I think at the time, Michael, banking is very regulated. It's very black and white, and there's not a lot of room for creativity, where with the events, you can get very creative. And I find that now I bring so much of what I've learned from the bank into my event business that it's really helped me be a stronger event planner because of it. So the two have crossed really well.
I have to ask, did Rabobank say, Colleen, you should do events?
No.
Okay.
Actually, the bank president called me into his office one day and said, I was told you've got a side business, you're doing events. And I thought, okay, I'm in trouble. And it was just the opposite.
Really?
He was an incredible president. And he said, go to HR, find the paperwork that we need. I'm going to sign off. And oh, by the way, you're doing all of our events now going forward. So with that, I did all of the ag appreciation events. I did golf tournaments. I did their Christmas party on top of my normal job, but it was a great mix and it was a lot of fun.
One of the things that trips up a lot of brides as well as business owners when you're doing their corporate event for them is budgeting the wedding budget or the corporate budget.
So the budget is actually one of the things we're known for. We stay very close to our budget. You'll never have a corporate event or a wedding where we're going to have you way out of budget. It's actually a starting place. After the initial consultation with the client, whether it be for a corporation or for a wedding, we talk about budget.
How much money do you want to spend? How does that look
like? They often don't know. It's often they throw a number out into the sky, and my job is to teach them, here's averagely what a venue is going to cost you. Here's the average cost of a photographer. Here's the average cost of food. And so my job is to kind of bring them back to reality to show them this is really what the event's going to cost you.
You have caviar taste.
Yes.
Right.
And we will work with any budget, but I can't, there's certain things I can't do depending on the budget. And you can get a lot more creative, obviously, with a big budget, but you can get creative with small budgets as well.
What's the top 3 things that most small business owners and most brides overlook when they're putting together that initial budget?
I would say all the little details.
Such as?
Signage is one that they sometimes forget to budget for. Rental costs, things that, okay, now, like for example, this weekend, it's going to be raining. Now we need to bring in a tent. We need to bring in heaters.
Right.
So you need a little bit of a buffer in your budget for those just in case situations that happen.
Planning a wedding is like planning a business. What percentage of leeway or gap do you give a wedding or a business corporate event?
I would say 10%. I would say give yourself a line item in your budget doc called miscellaneous. Drop in 10% of your overall budget there for just in case things that happen. Or tips, like sometimes my clients come back and go, oh, Colleen, I forgot to budget, to tip my catering team. So that's a good place to pull it out of, is just your miscellaneous section.
What are 2 or 3 things that separate fairy godmother events from the competition?
The first one is our team. We have an incredible team, and a lot of people talk about how big our team is and how cohesive they are and how well they work together. And when you hire a fairy godmother, you might just have one planner, but what you don't know is there's 8 other people behind that planner that are working with the planner behind the scenes.
Right.
And the beauty of that as well is every single thing we do is cloud-based. So if something were to happen to that planner or they were to get sick, somebody else can easily step in and take over that event. And we've had that happen 2 or 3 times where an emergency has arose and the client didn't even know. And it's because we have a very tight system in how we do everything, and everything, like I said, is cloud-based, so it's easy for that other planner to pick up and run with it. So that would be one thing. The second thing is we have very, very strong relationships with the wedding pros and event pros out in the community. And we're able to tap into those relationships when problems arise or when we need help with something. Situations like we had a big corporate event where we decided we needed an executive restroom the next morning at 7 in the morning. Well, you can't do that type of thing unless you have a relationship with a restroom company. So
right.
I was able to contact Kenny that night, and that morning we had the restroom there. And the corporation that we did the event for was shocked. They were like, I never thought, Colleen, you would make that happen.
Right.
Little things like this weekend, for example, we're expecting rain. Every pretty much tent company in town is booked. And the owner of Walker Lewis, Mark, called me and said, Colleen, what do you need? How can I help? You can't do that without those relationships. And because of the strong relationships, we're able to make things happen that ordinarily wouldn't happen or couldn't happen. We're very careful about how we present ourselves, how we present our brand, and how we take care of our clients. We want to make sure that we create legacy clients, and you do that by taking really good care of them, their family, and their guests.
And if you've decided that the house you're living in just isn't up to grade for your next private event that you could call Colleen to help coordinate for you, might I suggest you reach out to Mike Saba, a Zillow Premier Agent with Watson Realty, born and raised and never left Bakersfield. Give Mike Saba a call at 661-203-8406 or reach him at mikesaba1 at iCloud.com today. And Visioneers, if you've got a question, you've got a thought, something you'd like to learn about here on Small Business Celebration, reach out to us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, and your question could appear here on Small Business Celebration, just like Jessica, who asked, juggling a full-time job alongside a full-time business can be challenging. What are 3 essential strategies we can implement to excel in both areas?
First strategy would be financial. That's the banker in me.
Right, sure.
You really don't want to jump until you know you have that emergency savings set aside. And
generally, how much do you recommend that be?
I set aside 6 months worth. I felt like that was more than enough. A lot of people will say, 3 months worth is plenty, but I, being like the banker and budgeting and financing, that's really important that I had 6 months worth of savings set aside. What I did is I didn't really use the extra money. I just kept socking it away, because it's extra money. It's on top of your normal career.
Right.
You also have to be careful not to hurt your full-time job, and you don't want, in my case, I was lucky because the bank asked me to do their events, so they knew I was doing it.
Full disclosure with your employer is key.
Definitely have that conversation with them, because you don't want to start your business and brand it and pay for things and then they shut you down, which they easily can do. And they need to be your first priority because that's where your income's coming from as well. Then really start building those relationships. What I did is I had a goal. I was working full-time, and 2 to 3 times a week my goal was to get rid of the business cards that were in my purse. At the time, business cards were really being used, and so I would put a certain amount of business cards in my purse every week, and I knew that by Friday those cards had to be gone. So
and that was picking up the phone or texting
or just on your lunch hour, you know,
Okay.
because your lunch hour is all the time that you have, stopping in other businesses, introducing yourself, and asking them what you can do for them. Because I think sometimes we go into businesses and letting them know, you know, what we need them to do for us. So we want leads and we want appointments and here's who we are. And instead what I did is I really spent time getting to know them because I wanted to understand, you know, what is a florist looking for? What kind of client is looking for? What are the photographers looking for? So that I could bridge that gap. And I didn't go away. I kept checking in on them. And it's funny because there was one photographer that said, you just wouldn't go away. Like you just,
Sure.
You know, and he said, that's when I knew you were serious because
Right.
I have with wedding planners or event planners, it's very easy to start. And I had a very good friend, Kyle Brown with the Bridal Association, who told me, if you're going to do this, Colleen, do it right. Because an event planner only needs a business card to enter the business.
Right.
Where a photographer or a DJ, they have to spend thousands of dollars of equipment. And so many times people will do their own wedding or do a friend's wedding or an event and say, oh, I'm going to open a business. And then they'll realize the amount of work that's behind it.
Right.
So Kyle had really good advice and said, if you're going to do it right, and your reputation is everything. So
It's a common way of thinking that the wedding is the bride's day. We, the grooms, sometimes we like to say as well, how do you involve the groom without making the bride feel like, yeah, it's your day, but also remember the guy over here too?
So a couple things. We have found recently that grooms are involved. They're very involved. They're on the phone calls with us. We do something called a design deck where we actually go over all the design and we ask the brides to make sure the groom is involved in that appointment because that really shows him the whole wedding.
Nice.
And there is a section where we're talking about his outfit and his boutonniere, and so we actually ask for his input. I also talk to the brides though. There are some grooms that don't want to be involved.
They just want to show up.
They just want to show up. And so I talk to the bride and say, you need to have that conversation with your fiance. You need to find out what part are you interested in. My husband was interested in the transportation, the limo,
Right.
the DJ, and the tasting. And that was it.
Right.
And so that was very helpful that I knew that when it came time to book those three things, I was going to involve him. Otherwise, I was not going to involve him. I also tell our brides, clients, do not overwhelm them with 100 things that you're doing and 100 decisions. If they have picked 2 things, only involve them in those 2 things and come to me or your maid of honor or your mom for everything else because you will make them crazy. Because you're planning an event, the biggest event of your life that you've probably thought about since you were small or young, and for a full year, you will make them crazy in a full year if you don't really find out what part do you want to be a part of. Maybe they want to be a part of everything. So then you can involve them in everything, but a lot of the times it's just a few things that are really important to them. So I think it's important to find that out.
It sounds like you're an early stage marriage counselor.
Very true. Very true. Yes, early stage, and it continues all during the wedding.
At the time of this taping, we are just getting into wedding season. And it's wonderful that you can even join us because I'm sure you're going nuts right now. But wedding season is 4, maybe 5 months out of the year.
Correct.
There's a lot of other calendar months in the year. How did you make the transition from weddings to and corporate?
When we first started Fairy Godmother, my goal was to just do wedding day management. I was going to be the best wedding day manager out there. And I especially did that because I was working a full-time job and I knew I could do wedding day management and still do my job.
Right.
Then after several years, people kept asking me and we just handle the whole thing, like do the full planning. So then we started doing full planning. Corporate's a different ballgame though, because corporate, they need you available during the week. And so we weren't doing as much corporate. When I left the bank 6 years ago, immediately the corporate business started. And I believe it's because I came from corporate. I understand what a controller is looking for. I understand budgets. I understand, you know, a president of a company and a vice president and, you know, who's your CEO and the CFO. Like I understand the whole dynamics and I understand what they're looking for. I understand how to protect their branding and how to stay on target with what they're after, what their mission is.
Right.
So immediately when I left the bank, I went after corporate and started making sure they knew we were open for business. And so when that happened, probably about 80% of our business was weddings and 20% was corporate. Now it's 50-50.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's a lot of fun because corporate is very different from weddings. It's usually, Colleen, here's our brand, here's our color, here's the goal of the event, go. here's the money you're allowed to spend, go. And we almost don't talk to them again
Right.
we check in with them to make sure we're on target, and then our goal is always to deliver more than what they had anticipated. So that's a lot of fun. I mean, we get to be involved in a lot of really special things that happen, with corporate. The other thing that's been interesting that's happened in the last 6 months is that we've started doing a lot of Indian weddings, which is incredible. I love the history and the story and the dynamics of an Indian wedding, and it's sometimes 4 days long, and we're doing a lot of Indian events as well. But part of it is because we've done quite a few, and so we're getting very comfortable in that category, and not everybody can handle an Indian wedding, so that's something new. I shouldn't say it's not new. We've been probably doing it for maybe about 10 years, but we're really doing a lot right now, which is very exciting.
And that brings us to the Visioneer game. Now, Visioneers, if you're not familiar with the way the game works, I have a random word generator here on my phone. I have no idea what the random word generator is going to create, but more importantly, neither does our guest. And our guest has to take each of 3 words that I give her and somehow associate each word with her business. Now, Colleen, you do realize that the entire wedding industry and the corporate event planning business is based upon your ability to get these 3 words correct. And if you fail, catastrophe will run rampant.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, your first word is conversation.
Conversations are very important. If you don't have a lot of conversations beforehand, you will not know what's going on the day of the event.
Very good. That's 1 for 1. We're off to the right track. Let's see. Our second word is heavy.
Heavy. You have to be willing to do the heavy lifting. Sometimes there's a lot of behind the scenes things that people don't know about, and you have to be willing to jump in there and get it done.
3-ton ice sculptures?
Chairs usually, or tables. It's usually what we get.
Very good. Yeah. That's 2 for 2. Okay, our third word is protest.
Oh, sometimes you do have protests that go on, whether it be little ones that will not go down the aisle for flower girl or ring bearer, or maybe it's a protest of a mom that doesn't want a certain thing done, and so you have to be able to work around all of that and just make it happen.
All those who don't, what's the phrase that forever you hold, if those who
Never
don't
hold your peace.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Sometimes they don't.
Exactly. That's 3 for 3. Well done, you. The entire wedding industry and corporate event planning world is safe because of you.
Thank you.
Let's play another word association game. Bridezilla, Dadzilla, Auntzilla, Groomzilla, Best Manzilla, Best Ladyzilla. What do all these have in common, and how do you manage or work with all these zillas that can easily train wreck an event?
I try and find out where it's coming from.
Okay.
It's usually coming from something, either a concern or a back history or pressure from an area that I don't know about. And if I can figure that out, I can figure out how to take care of them. And so all of those terms happen. We're lucky though, we don't have a lot of it. And I think it's just because we don't attract it. And I feel as though a lot of 80% of our business comes from referrals. If you're attracting a lot of that, that's what you're going to be getting a lot of. So we just don't get a lot of it. And when we do, we really work hard to find out where is it coming from. For example, if you have a bride that's constant communication and seems very, very nervous, she needs more. So she needs a one-on-one phone call every Thursday at 6 o'clock that she knows she's going to get me. She knows we're going to talk. And it calms them down. So it's my goal to find out where is it coming from. Because there's usually a reason that they're like that. Either they had a bad experience, or their best friend got married and had a horrible experience, or there's a lot of pressure to get this wedding right. Sometimes that happens for the groom or for the bride because there's a lot of family history. Maybe it's bringing families together that have not been together in years. Maybe it's bringing parents together that don't speak.
Right.
So there's something going on. And so my job is to figure out what that is to help them alleviate that stress, and then it calms everybody down.
How often do you come into the process after the engagement ring has been given?
We don't get involved. And that we don't do engagements. There are planners that they handle surprise engagements and things like that. We don't offer that service, so we're not involved in that portion. But I will tell you, I'm very good friends with John at Don Hall Jewelers, and he talks to me a lot about what's going on in the industry. And the diamonds, the man-made diamonds now are beautiful. They're not cubic zirconians.
Right.
They're a beautiful man-made diamond, and you cannot tell the difference.
You can scratch glass with them?
You can.
Wow.
Yes, they're beautiful, and he's shown me several, and they're very popular. But that being said,
Right.
it might be more important to the person that you're going to engage to have a real diamond. So don't make that mistake of bringing in a man-made diamond when that's not okay with them. So I think it's important to make sure you know the person, obviously, and what their style is. And I think every situation's different. Some brides want to pick out their rings. Here's the styles I like, but you pick out the final ring. Some brides don't want to be involved at all.
Right.
Some brides, want it to be a complete surprise. So I think it's important to figure that out. And you can do that through talking to family members and parents and things like that as well, without having to ruin your surprise if that's the route you're going.
Tell me about Lizette Gomez. She referred you to us.
I know, I was so happy when I got that email. Lizette is terrific. She's actually going to be our chair for the Bakersfield Business Women's Conferences next year. And we're already, believe it or not, the conference just ended on Thursday. We're already talking about next year's speaker.
Nice.
So I know Lizette through the conference. We met, I believe it was 2 years ago. She was our volunteer chair, handled all of our volunteers. She had all the volunteers this year and does an incredible job.
And that brings us to our second Visioneer question, which is also brought to you by Mike Saba, a Zillow Premier Agent with Watson Realty, selling Bakersfield homes since 1992. Give Mike Saba a call at 661-203-8406 or reach him at mikesaba1@icloud.com today. And this question comes from Visioneer Jordan, who asks, we are seeking ways to broaden our business horizons. What method do you use to approach your legacy clients in order to expand into your new venture?
I believe business people don't ask for referrals. I think it's important that you take really good care of clients and be okay to ask who else do you know that needs an event planner or needs whatever business that is that you have. And it's very important to have great mentors.
How did you tap into your legacy clients in the wedding space to say, hey, if you got a business, if you know somebody's got a corporate business, how did you tap into that market?
It's meeting with the event pros that are doing that type of business, having conversations with them to let them know you're open for business in that area. It's through social media. Social media is extremely important. TikTok, Pinterest, YouTube, your website, Instagram, Facebook are all equally important for different categories of people. And it's important to get out in the community, whether it be through the chamber mixers or women's organizations that we belong to. You have to do a lot of things. It's not just one thing.
There's only so many hours in a day. How do you keep yourself motivated to build and grow your business while you also have this full-time job?
Daily goals. I know that sounds a little crazy, but I still do to this day, where I have a small journal. And the night before, I set my goals for the next day. And I know what work is going to be like, and so I want to also make sure to add in the goals for the business. So I had a couple goals. Maybe it was, okay, today I'm going to contact my favorite venue and ask if I can come by and just see the venue and spend a little bit of time with them. So it's action. You have to have action every day.
It's more than just say, okay, I'm going to create a list. You actually have to create the list and pick up the phone.
Yes, and you have to get out and talk to people. You have to meet people. In my business especially, being in the event industry, it's a very personal business. So you have to self-motivate by giving yourself those goals, but then like you said, you have to do them. You can't just write them down. Like, you have to accomplish them and then really look at the end of the week to see how you did. And I think the other piece, and we've talked about before, is finding great mentors. I actually, when I first started Fairy Godmother, I looked at who's the #1 photographer, who's the #1 DJ, where's the #1 venue, who's the #1 florist, and I would ask people. And what ends up happening is that you start hearing the same person over and over again. And so then what I did is I set my sight on those people. Those are the people that I wanted to meet and greet and what made them so great, and just get to know them. And that worked.
There are a lot of moving parts to coordinating any kind of event. How do you keep everybody on the same page?
We actually talk once a month. We have a conference call, a team conference call that's about 2 hours.
Wow.
And it's like a Zoom call. And we do more than just meeting items. We have training every single meeting. And each meeting we talk about the next meeting and what do they want to learn and then who's going to teach it. And each one of them take on parts of it. So everybody's involved in the call. And we won't do the call unless they all can join. So that's important because I want them all to be involved.
Right.
We also have a private Facebook page for our team, and we all communicate on that page. And
I could just see some of the pictures that you post on some of the disasters that the public will never see.
Yes. And we work really hard as a team, and it's a safe landing for them if they've had a bad experience or something's happened with a particular wedding pro. And we have them all sign a code of ethics where we will not talk badly about another event pro ever. You'll never hear us badger anybody on social media. There's just no reason for it, and it brings bad ill.
Where is the oddest place that you have been doing this Zoom meeting? Because I can imagine with your schedule, you'll be off in Bangor, Maine doing a wedding, and I've got this Zoom call, and out comes a laptop. And where's the oddest location you've ever done one of these meetings?
Well, I've done one in Missouri. My son's in Missouri now, and so I did a Zoom call there, which was interesting to set up and do. But for the most part, in my office, I don't, because they're always scheduled, so we always make sure the team knows. I don't want you taking a Zoom call from the car.
Oh, okay.
You know the Zoom call's coming. Set that time aside. Have an office quietly, shut the door, and really get the most out of the call. It shouldn't be something that you are in a crazy place, because how are you going to really learn and absorb? And we're only meeting once a month.
Right.
So, and way ahead of time this meeting's taking place, and it's important that they, fully engage and that they're there and taking notes and learning. So.
And you make sure you don't schedule it for a Saturday at 2 p.m.
Correct. Yes, correct. And we always schedule the next call, so we make sure that everybody's available. And for the most part, it's usually 7 o'clock is when we do it, because if they have children, the kids have been fed and they're relaxing or getting ready to go to bed, and so we work around everybody's schedule.
It's no secret that there are a lot of business owners right now that are struggling. What do you say for the business owner, your colleagues, that are having a difficult time, and let them know that, it's going to be okay?
I would reach out to somebody that's doing well. Have lunch with them, treat them for coffee, treat them to lunch.
Even if you can't afford it?
Yeah, exactly. That's true. You don't have to, coffee is great at this point, because now lunches are so expensive you can't go to lunch for less than $50. So go for coffee. There's some great coffee shops in town, and pick their brain a little bit. Ask them what they're doing, that's successful for them. People, I find, especially in Bakersfield, are willing to help other people. We just don't ask. You gotta ask. It's gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay. And help them figure out what is it that they're caught up in. What's the problem? Like, where are they? Have they lost their love for what they're doing? Do they need to refine it? Do they need to rekindle a certain section? Do they need to remember why they started the business in the first place and go back to that and rebuild that? Do they need to change direction a little bit, do something different? Do they need to stay relevant? Sometimes businesses are no longer relevant, and they've felt like, I no longer, and I'll just use the event industry for example, they no longer need to do a bridal show because their clients are at the bridal show, but sometimes you do the bridal show for a different reason. You need to still be relevant, you still need to be out there. Don't lose that, and stay humble. Yes, you might be successful and doing really, really well, but don't forget where you started, and help others. I think that's really important.
Colleen, this has been a real treat. Thank you for joining us here on Small Business Celebration.
Thank you for having me.
And for Visioneers who want to reach out and get in touch with you, how do they do that?
They can call me at 661-808-7816, or they can also find me on Instagram. I'm under fairygodmother.colleen.
Website?
Website is fairygodmotherinc.co.
And I'll be right back after a short message from Scott Garrison of Planned Exits on an inner failure is something that we spend a lifetime overcoming that makes us unique.
Thank you, Michael. I like to work with my clients to find out where they are on the owner cycle. Typically, they start off obsessed, and that's all they can think about is their business. Then after a few years, they still have passion and are working hard, but eventually it leads to boredom and maybe even burnout. At Planned Exits, we try to prevent you from getting to that final stage. Visit my website, plannedexits.com.
An inner failure is something we spend a lifetime overcoming that makes us unique. On occasion, I still continue to be a director of photography down in Hollywood, and many years ago I was on set, and it was one of these days where it's a 16, 18, 20-hour day when everybody starts to get a little grumpy. And the lead actor and the lead actress were off stage talking and whatnot, and invariably the conversation turned to politics, and the two of them couldn't have a more divergent sense of view on the subject. And as they continued to talk, the conversation became more animated, and while she kept her cool for the most part, he got to the point where he just started to yell and shout, and in fact, he finally got to the point where he just pounded on the table, in which he suddenly paused, cursed under his breath, and left the room. And about an hour later, he came back with a dozen roses and a handwritten note. And as he presented the actress with these roses and the handwritten note, behind him was her assistant, who suddenly had this look of absolute horror on her face. For at that time, less than a dozen people knew that the actress was allergic to roses. But the actress held the dozen roses and had opened up the note and read, "I offer you my sincerest apologies, for my father was an angry, vengeful man who used to yell and scream and pound his fists upon the table when things didn't go his way, and I have spent an entire lifetime overcoming this." And as she looked up at the actor, her eyes watering, she gave him a smile, to which his face softened, and she stood up and said, "Thank you for these. Excuse me while I go find a prominent place to put them." Later, when she was asked about the incident, she smiled, and I love her answer, for she said, "An inner failure is something we spend a lifetime overcoming that makes us unique." I hope you enjoyed our conversation this week here on Small Business Celebration, and I hope you learned something that you can use today to grow a strong and profitable business. And we'll see you here again next week when we celebrate another small business making a big breakthrough.
My wedding trend predictions as an event planner are black and white is still really big, less bridal party and wedding party, you see less of them more and more I believe, and less traditional garter toss, bouquet toss, and cake cutting. One of the funniest things I've seen at a wedding is that we blindfolded the groom when it came time for the garter, to taking the garter off.
Right.
His best friend sat in the chair and he took the garter off the friend with his teeth, not knowing it was his friend and not his bride, until the tie came off his eyes. Top 3 things that you should remember when you're planning your wedding is remember to keep your guests in mind and their experience. Also remember to try and stay on target, stay on budget, and be sure that you don't lose each other in the process of planning the wedding. Top 3 things to look for in a wedding vacation. Does it have a memory for you? Is there a reason for you to be at that location? Does it have the feel or the theme that you're looking for, and is it within your budget? Don't waste your money on these 3 things. Party favors, wedding favors, they're often thrown away. You don't always have to do a formal champagne toast. The guests can toast with what they're currently drinking in their hand. And you don't always have to do a lot of appetizers. Your goal in the appetizer section is to feed them, but you don't need to overfeed them because they're going to be having dinner in less than 40 minutes. 3 budget items that most brides forget to plan for are tipping your wedding vendors. They sometimes forget the extra cost for signage, and then sometimes an extra cost for little emergencies like rain. Top 3 things to look for in a wedding planner is what is their backup plan? If something happens to them, do they have a good backup plan? Especially if it's just a 1-person team. Can somebody else take over if something happens? 2, what are the relations in the community? So do they have good relationships with the wedding pros around? And 3, what is their experience like? How long have they been in business? And what do the reviews say about them?